Hello and welcome to India Business Hour. I'm Ashmit Kumar and here are the headlines that we're tracking this evening. World Bank cuts India's growth projections by 40 basis points to 6.3% for FY26. Also trims FY27 forecast to 6.5%. Expects global growth to slow into 2008 levels of 2.3%, excluding recessions. Cites rising trade barriers and policy uncertainty. Inflows into equity mutual funds dropped to a 13-month low in May. Large cap funds see a 53% decline, but SIP inflows remain steady, hitting yet another record high. US and China continue trade negotiations in London. President Trump says the talks are going well and he's only getting good reports.
We'll have our big four in India very soon. Wait and watch.
Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says India is attempting to create large domestic accounting firms and will have its own big four very soon. Hints at more mergers and acquisitions after change in rules. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar says India is hopeful of reaching a trade agreement with the US before the July 9th deadline. Commerce Minister Goyal calls China's stranglehold on rare earth magnets a wake-up call for the world. Maruti Suzuki likely to delay the commercial launch of e-Vitara as China's stranglehold on rare earth magnets hits the auto giant's production targets. Sources tell CNBC TV18 that the company has cut its production targets till September. However, clarify that production has not been deferred. Union government sends requests to state governments, asks them to use the services of state-run BSNL and MTNL across all departments and public sector units. US President Donald Trump deploys 700 Marines and additional 2,000 National Guard troops to protect federal buildings in Los Angeles as his standoff with California Governor Newsom escalates. California sues the Trump administration for calling in the National Guard without the authorization from the state's governor. Over 60 killed in Gaza overnight in Israeli airstrikes. Tel Aviv deports Greta Thunberg a day after the Israeli Navy seized a Gaza-bound boat with the Swedish activist and others on board. Israel's foreign ministry says she was put on a flight to France, where she would continue her journey to her home country of Sweden. 2 people are dead and dozens injured after Russia launches a major air attack on Kyiv and Odessa using over 300 drones. Ukraine's Zelensky claims Russia used at least 7 ballistic missiles and calls on the US to force Russia into peace. Coast Guard battles raging fire on a cargo ship off the Kerala coast for the second day. The Singapore-flagged ship was carrying hazardous chemicals and flammable materials. 18 crew members rescued and 4 remain unaccounted for. Apple shares decline in trade as investors are not impressed with announcements related to artificial intelligence at the annual Developers Conference. Reports suggest Facebook's parent Meta is set to unveil a new research lab dedicated to pursuing superintelligence. Well, straight to the day's trading action. Well, Sensex and Nifty ended marginally flat after a range-bound session. The Nifty closed in the green for the 5th straight day, holding on to levels above the 25,100 mark. The Nifty Bank fell over 200 points, while mid-caps rose marginally. Well, speaking of the markets, the inflows into equity mutual funds have dropped to a 13-month low in May. Investments in large-cap funds have seen a decline of as much as 53%. However, inflows into SIPs remain steady, hitting yet another record high. Surbhi Upadhyay is joining us now with more details. Surbhi.
Well, it's a bit of a sobering reality for mutual fund inflows in the month of May. And this is not just May alone. We've seen this pattern build from February of this year. And increasingly, month after month, the net inflows coming into equity funds have dipped. Now that level has come down to a sobering reality of 18,995. So imagine this, from a peak of close to 41,000 crores that we were getting every month in equity funds. Now we're just under 19,000 crores. And this is also, the May figure is the lowest inflow figure since April 2024. This is kind of showing up across categories. Large cap funds, the inflows have halved. I mean, this time we've seen just an inflow of about 1,250 crores. Even mid and small caps, relatively better than what we've seen in the large cap category. But even there, month on month, the dip is between 15% to about 20% in the inflows. For the small cap, the category has got the largest inflow. I mean, if you're looking at the three capitalization categories this month at around 3,214 crores. The good news is that there's been some revival in new fund offerings, NFOs, because of which we have seen the total inflow via the NFO route go back above the 4,000 crore rupee mark. Remember, at the peak, when we were getting 40,000 crores every month, a lot of that money was coming through the NFO route. And that has been petering off as the market got extremely volatile. The silver lining, yes, as you rightly said, it's SIP. So investors are still keeping the faith in systematic investment plans. And that number is rock steady, no problems there. 26,688, so almost knocking at the doorsteps of 26,700 crores. The overall industry AUM continues to inch higher as well, and it has crossed over 72 lakh crores at 72.19 to be precise. In a summary, equity inflows have come down, market volatility has played a part, but investors are keeping the faith on the long-term journey with those SIPs.
Right, Surbhi, thanks so much for that. Now, the World Bank has cut India's growth forecast for FY26 and FY27, projecting growth acceleration is imminent from FY28. However, the report has highlighted that India is estimated to maintain the fastest growth rate among the world's largest economies. The World Bank also expects global growth to slow to 2008 levels of 2.3%, excluding recessions, citing rising trade barriers and policy uncertainty as the main reasons. Ritu Singh joins us with more details. Ritu, take us through the highlights of this report.
Let me begin with India, which is projected to maintain the fastest growth rate among the world's largest economies at 6.3% for FY26. But this is a slight downgrade, about 40 basis points lower than World Bank's January forecast, mainly because of weaker global demand and rising trade barriers impacting our exports. Now, this number compares with IMF's forecast of 6.2% and RBI's own 6.5% projection for the fiscal. But India is expected to bounce back. Growth is projected to average 6.6% in the next two fiscal years at 6.5% for FY27 and 6.7% for FY28, driven by a strong services sector and a recovery in exports. But the picture is far less optimistic for the global economy, where growth is expected to weaken to 2.3% this year, with deceleration in most economies relative to last year. This, the World Bank says, will mark the slowest rate of growth since 2008, aside, of course, from outright global recessions. Now, a slow and uneven recovery is expected, with growth inching up to 2.4% in 2026 and 2.6% thereafter, leaving the global output materially below the January projections. To compare, IMF's last forecast for global economy was a tad higher at 2.8% this year and 3% for 2026. Now, the World Bank says rising trade barriers, policy uncertainty, and geopolitical tensions are largely to blame. Growth in advanced economies as well as emerging market economies will still remain far below their pre-pandemic trend, and the per capita income growth in emerging economies is expected to lag behind the richer nations, and poverty reduction, especially in fragile and conflict-hit countries, is stalling. Now, global trade is also expected to slow down sharply to well below historic averages this year. The World Bank says risks are mostly to the downside. A major worry, of course, is if the US raises the average tariffs by 10 percentage points, for instance, and trading partners retaliate, global growth could plunge by another 0.5% this year. But if disputes are resolved and tensions ease, growth could also increase by 0.2 percentage points, which offers some upside potential.
Right, Ritu, thanks so much for that. Now, it's day 2 of high-level trade talks between US and China in London. US President Donald Trump remains optimistic on the nature of these talks. Addressing the media, Trump said that while US officials are doing very well with China, Chinese officials are not that easy. He added that he's receiving only good reports from US officials present at this meeting. Remember, these talks come after US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping held a phone call in a bid to thaw trade tensions between the two countries.
We are doing well with China. China's not easy, just like your home country is not easy there. I think we're doing very well. They're over there now. I'm only getting good reports. It's a little early, but they'll be calling in soon. In fact, probably when I get back, I'll have my first call from them. We want to open up China. And if we don't open up China, maybe we won't do anything. But we want to open up China. It'll be a great thing for China, a great thing for the rest of the world.
The US-China talks are continuing into their second day here in London. These are, without doubt, tough negotiations. We do have some indications that the principal stumbling blocks, as was to be expected, are export of chips from the US on the one hand and of rare earth elements from China on the other. Kevin Hassett, who heads the National Economic Council in the US, had said on Monday following the talks, which he described as a handshake, export controls from the US could be eased, and in return he said the US wants rare earth elements from China released by volume. China produces about 70% of the world's rare earth elements, and these are critical for US technological production, all the way from smartphones and cars to defense, and they go into nuclear programs as well. The US, according to some reports, could be offering concessions on export of chip design software, nuclear materials and jet engine parts, but not on the highly sophisticated NVIDIA chips that enable AI. The dominant question as it talks today is really how much of what either eases up on. After more than 6 hours of talks on Monday, the US Commerce Secretary described the meeting as fruitful. On the other side, the Chinese Vice Premier Ha Lifan left the talks without making any comment. President Trump, who does comment really on everything, said he's getting good reports and that the US is doing well with China, but he added that China is not easy. The US isn't either. What is expected at best is only some limited agreement.
Now, India's total exports may touch the $900 billion mark in FY26 compared to $825 billion last year. Sources have told CNBC TV 18 that the government is also eyeing entry into new markets amidst global uncertainties. However, the projection falls short of the $1 trillion mark estimated by the Federation of Indian Exporters. The government believes that reaching the $1 trillion milestone this fiscal may be challenging in the current global environment. Now, India and the US are likely to reach a trade pact before the current tariff suspension ends on the 9th of July. That's the word coming in from External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. In an interview to a French daily, Jaishankar said that India had already begun bilateral discussions for a trade agreement prior to the imposition of reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd. In a separate interview to US-based digital publisher Politico, the External Affairs Minister reiterated India's stance against terrorism. He said, and I quote, "We will go deep into Pakistan to fight terrorists." The remarks come as the External Affairs Minister is on a 5-day visit to France, EU and the Belgium. Well, back home, Maruti Suzuki is likely to delay commercial launch of the e-Vitara in India. Sources tell CNBC TV 18 that to be delayed due to rare earth magnet crisis, that the company has cut its production target till September. However, the auto major has not deferred production. Parishat Luthra is joining us now with more details. Parishat.
Well, clearly, Maruti Suzuki feeling the heat as a result of the export curbs imposed by China on rare earth magnets. Now, the big launch from Maruti this year, as they had announced at the Auto Expo, was the electric Vitara. They were going to start off with exports to global markets, especially Japan and Europe, and then begin an India launch, commercial sales, probably in July or August. Now, we believe that the commercial launch in India could be delayed as a result of the curbs on rare earth magnets. What we are hearing from our sources that they originally had a plan in the month of April, which they shared with suppliers, to make 88,000 electric cars in India at their different plants. That production outlook was slashed to 67,000 recently. Now, within that, there was a plan to have 26,500 e-Vitaras made between April and September. That production outlook has been slashed to 8,200 for now because Maruti does not have enough inventory, or it does not foresee having enough inventory for the earlier production outlook. So, as opposed to 26,500 that they were looking to make till September, they will only make 8,200. But they are still hoping to meet their revised forecast for 67,000 vehicles to be produced for the whole of FY26. And whatever they cannot produce till September, they will try and make it up October onwards. But all of that depends on rare earth magnets. We've also been told that their start of production has not been stopped. The production is taking place, although in low quantities. And we believe that this manufacturing that is taking place right now will be for export markets initially.
Right, Parikshit, thanks so much for that. Now, moving ahead, Raymond's chairman and managing director Gautam Singhania has said that Raymond Realty is on track to list in early July. According to a Reuters report, Singhania clarified that the exact date hasn't been fixed as of yet. This will be Raymond's third publicly traded entity after Raymond Lifestyle, which houses suits and shirts business. And the union government has sent requests to state governments asking them to use the services of state-run BSNL and MTNL across all departments and public sector units. In a letter to the state authorities, the government cited data security concerns as its reasons. And market regulator SEBI has given its green signal to 4 companies to raise funds via an initial public offering. Kent RO Systems, Karam Tara Engineering, Mangal Electrical Industries and Vidya Wires have received the regulatory nod. The firms are expected to raise at least 2,500 crore rupees through their market debut. And speaking of IPOs, ICICI Prudential AMC is all set to make its market debut. A money control report has highlighted that the firm is engaging the 17 investment banks. DRHP papers will be likely filed by the end of this month. The entire public issue will comprise an offer for sale component with no participation by ICICI Bank. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says that China's export curbs on rare earth magnets is a wake-up call for the whole world. Speaking in Switzerland during his official visit, Goyal added that countries needed to diversify their supply chains and India is actively developing alternative sources.
We are working on several other tracks to see the availability from alternate sources, to look at our Indian Indian Rare Earths Limited, providing the necessary materials to be able to speed up the development of our own products. And in a way, it's a wake-up call for all those who have become over-reliant on certain geographies. It's a wake-up call for the whole world that you need trusted partners in your supply chain. And India is now becoming the alternate.
Well, staying with the Commerce Minister, Piyush Goyal also said that India will soon establish its own Big Four accounting firms. Speaking on the sidelines of an event in Switzerland, Goyal said that the government was on track to creating large domestic accounting firms in India. He added that India will soon have firms that emulate the hiring capacity of the Big Four firms that employ over 3 lakh people in India. Currently, Deloitte, PwC, EY and KPMG constitute the Big Four firms. The firms require Indian affiliates to conduct audit operations in India. Revenues from these operations are less than 10% of the total revenue. A majority of the firm's income are from consulting, advisory, transactions, and tax-related work. These firms control 10% of the market share in the auditing space. The domestic capital of all the firms in the Big Four is owned by Indian partners.
So the Deloittes and Ernst & Youngs of the world have understood this. Each of these Big Four is hiring 100,000 people in India, 120,000 people. Now we are trying to create our own Big Four. Earlier the rules were very funny, we couldn't have mergers of all the CA firms. And our mindset was also different. Now gradually people are understanding. We'll have our Big Four in India very soon. Wait and watch.
Now, domestic audit firms feel that there needs to be a level playing field when it comes to competing with the Big Four global accounting firms. We spoke to them to understand more about the challenges they were facing. We also spoke to Ajay Bal of AZB and Partners, who told us that archaic regulations were holding Indian accounting firms back.
The large consulting assignments which the Big Four today vie for, and which is what they are looking forward to executing in India, their competitors are not domestic firms, but their competitors are really the IT firms. So the Big Four would compete with the TCS, NNHCL, Wipro, and whoever else for the assignments that they are looking for. So that's a scenario that we are looking at. It is just important that Indian firms make a mark of their own, become global organizations.
I think there's a misnomer to call them global accounting firms. As you rightly said, they are Indian accounting firms. It's an Indian accounting firm which has access to know-how, access to technology, access to systems. And it's all owned by Indian partners. I've dealt with them for years. I have not seen foreigners floating around in their offices or corridors.
Families, partners, etc., do not necessarily have the capital to invest like some of the bigger, big five, etc., have. That capital can come from the private equity ecosystem, as is the case in the Western markets today. There are 1 in 2 firms out of the top 30 in the UK which are today private equity owned. Private equity capital is sitting with huge interest to want to come and propel this business, only if regulations allow that.
Institute needs to get real and tell the government we are happy to have these advertising limitations go away. Secondly, the institute has to make it easier for firms to aggregate. I've looked at these aggregation guidelines. I can have a chat with you on that. They were bizarre. And you have to promote actual growth in size.
And you can catch the entire coverage of India's big accounting vision with top brass of domestic audit firms at 9:30 p.m. right here on News Center on CNBC TV 18. Coming up on India Business Hour, Coast Guard battles raging fire on a cargo ship off the Kerala coast for the second day. More details in just a bit. And you can also catch all CNBC TV 18 news and updates on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X, and Jio Hotstar. You are watching India Business Hour. Now, United Nations report has estimated India's population to reach 1.46 billion in 2025, maintaining its status as the most populous nation. However, the report also reveals a significant demographic shift. India's total fertility rate has dropped to 1.9 births per woman, below the replacement level of 2.1. This means that Indians are having fewer babies than it takes to maintain the current population level. India still boasts a large youth population. Nearly 70% of the population is of working age. Now, in other national news, the Indian Coast Guard is battling a raging fire on a cargo ship off the Kerala coast for the second day. The Singapore-flagged ship was carrying hazardous chemicals and flammable materials. 18 crew members were rescued and 4 remain unaccounted for. CNN News 18's Neethu is joining us with a report from Trivandrum.
The search for the missing 4 crew members from the Singapore-flagged container vessel are still continuing. The accident happened at about 9:30 yesterday off the Kerala coast, about 44 nautical miles from part of Kozhikode in Kerala. But the fire has still not yet been brought completely under control because there has been flammables in this vessel. Many of these containers have pesticides, lithium batteries, paint-related items like varnish, environmentally hazardous subjects. There are flammables which are there in this. So that is what it is making it even more difficult to put down the fire. So the firefighting is still continuing at this moment. It has not been brought completely under control. 18 of the crew members have been rescued and they have been brought to a hospital in Mangalore. The Coast Guard, the Navy is continuing their operations. The state disaster management team is also keeping a close eye on this. But it's definitely a concern since there are flammable and environmentally hazardous materials in this container vessel also.
Now, Israeli forces have killed at least 60 Palestinians in Gaza, including at least 14 people near the US-backed aid center in southern Rafah. Reports suggested that Israeli soldiers arrested Palestinians in raids across occupied West Bank. According to Hamas-run Gaza's health ministry, nearly 55,000 Palestinians have died since the war began in 2023. And Israel has deported Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. In a post on X, the Israeli Foreign Ministry said that the 22-year-old was put on a flight to Sweden via France. Thunberg was one of 12 passengers on board a flotilla carrying aid to Gaza, which the Israeli Navy intercepted. 2 people are dead and dozens injured after Russia launched a major air attack on Kyiv and Odessa using over 300 drones. Ukrainian President Zelensky has claimed that Russia used at least 7 ballistic missiles and called on the US to force Russia into peace. At least 10 have died and several others injured after a school shooting in Austria. The suspected shooter, who's believed to be a former student of the school, is reported to have died of suicide. 28 people are being treated for their injuries in the hospital. 3 days of mourning have been declared in Austria. US President Trump has deployed 700 Marines and additional 2,000 National Guard troops in Los Angeles as protests enter the 4th day. They will join the 2,000 guardsmen currently operational in the city. The US Defense Department has said that the Marines were deployed to protect federal buildings in Los Angeles. California has sued the Trump administration for calling in the National Guard without the authorization from the state's governor, Gavin Newsom. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Business Up. Thanks so much for watching. News and updates will continue right here on CNBC TV 18.